The phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. on the coldest night of the year. I almost didn't answer. I was on my second bowl of cereal, half asleep on the couch, watching some home renovation show I didn't care about. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but the area code was my hometown, a place I'd spent the better part of 3 years trying to forget. I stared at it for 2 more rings, then picked up. Uncle? The voice was so small I thought I'd imagined it. Uncle, it's me, my niece, 8 years old. And the way she said those 2 words, not excited, not playful, the way she always used to be when she'd steal my phone to take blurry pictures of the dog. She sounded like someone who had been waiting a very long time to say them and wasn't sure she'd be allowed to finish. Hey, I said, sitting up so fast I knocked the bowl off my knee. Hey, I'm here. What's going on? Whose phone is this? My teacher's. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. She let me borrow it. She's outside. I only have a minute. Okay, I'm listening. I'm hungry. She stopped. Then, quieter, I've been hungry for a long time. I was already standing up, looking for my keys. My sister Renata, her mother died 19 months ago. Ovarian cancer, stage 4, diagnosed in March and gone by August. She was 31. She had bought a car seat that April for a road trip they were never going to take. I kept it in my closet because I didn't know what else to do with it. When she died, my niece, her name is Poppy. She has her mother's nose and her father's stubbornness and a laugh that takes over her whole face, was placed with my parents. My father had retired 2 years prior. My mother had been begging to be more involved since Poppy was born. The arrangement seemed to make sense to everyone except, I would come to understand, Poppy herself. I was 29 at the time. I was renting a 1-bedroom apartment in Columbus, working as a service technician for an HVAC company, making decent money but not the kind that makes judges comfortable. When the custody question came up, my parents' attorney did most of the talking. I didn't fight it. I told myself it was because I was being practical. I told myself an 8-year-old needed stability, a real house, 2 adults, a backyard. The truth is I was grieving so hard I could barely show up to work. I thought I was making the right call for Poppy. I have thought about that every single day since. My parents moved back to their house in Denton, a small city in northern Ohio, about 45 minutes from where I grew up. It was the house I'd never been particularly comfortable in. The kind of house where the carpets were always clean, but you were always vaguely aware of that fact, always slightly afraid to walk on them. My father ran a tight ship. My mother deferred to him on almost everything. They weren't cruel people, I told myself. They were just old-fashioned. I visited twice after they took Poppy in. The first time was around Thanksgiving, about 2 months after the funeral. Poppy seemed fine, quiet, clingy with me in the way she'd always been, a little distant with my parents, but that felt normal given everything she'd been through. She showed me a drawing she'd made of a purple horse. I put it on my refrigerator when I got home. The second visit was in February. Something felt different, and I couldn't name it right away. Poppy was thinner, not dramatically, not in a way I could have pointed to in a photo. But I'd held her hand at her mother's graveside, and I knew what her wrist felt like, and in February it felt different. I asked her if she was eating okay, and she nodded and looked at the floor. My father was talking about a trip they were planning to Florida. My mother was showing me the new patio furniture they'd ordered. I drove home telling myself I was being paranoid. Poppy's teacher's name was Ms. Aldridge. I found that out later. She taught 3rd grade at an elementary school in Denton and had noticed over the course of several weeks that Poppy was coming in wearing the same 3 outfits on rotation, that she sometimes fell asleep at her desk before lunch, and that she flinched, just slightly, a small animal reflex, when adults raised their voices. Miss Aldridge had flagged it to the school counselor. The school counselor had called my parents. My father had come in wearing a nice shirt and told them Poppy had been having trouble adjusting since her mother's death, that they were getting her grief counseling, that they appreciated the concern. He said it in the way he said everything, measured, confident, with the particular authority of a man who has never been questioned and does not expect to start now. The school had accepted this. Required reporter or not, they'd accepted it, but Miss Aldridge hadn't. She kept watching, and on the night of January 14th, when temperatures in Denton dropped to 11 degrees and a winter storm warning had been in effect since noon, she saw Poppy standing alone outside the school at 5:30 p.m. 2 hours after dismissal, in a jacket that was too thin for October, let alone January. The rest of the school was locked. The parking lot was empty. Poppy had her backpack and a stuffed dog with a missing eye that she carried everywhere, and she was standing at the edge of the sidewalk, looking down the road like she was waiting for a bus that wasn't coming. Ms. Aldridge had been heading back to her car after a staff meeting. She took Poppy inside and got her warm, and gave her a granola bar from her desk drawer. Poppy ate it in 4 bites, and then looked at Ms. Aldridge and asked if there were more, and then asked her what had happened. Poppy said she didn't know. She said she'd waited for someone to come get her, and nobody had come. Miss Aldridge called my parents 3 times. My father answered on the 3rd call and said there had been a miscommunication about pickup and that he was on his way. He sounded irritated, not concerned. He showed up 45 minutes later. Before she handed Poppy over, Ms. Aldridge asked Poppy quietly if it was okay for her to borrow her phone for just a second, and Poppy told her there was one number she wanted to call. She'd had my number memorized since she was 5. Her mother had made her learn it the way other kids learned their address. I made the drive in just under an hour. I know because I watched the clock the whole way, one of those things you do when your brain refuses to sit still. 49 minutes from my apartment door to the end of my parents' street. The house was lit up, both cars in the driveway, warm yellow light in the living room windows. From the outside it looked fine, the way it always looked fine. I knocked. My father opened the door and looked at me the way he looked at most things, with an expression that suggested I was a complication he was choosing to be patient about. "It's almost 1 in the morning," he said. "I know." I looked past him. "Where is she?" "She's asleep. She's fine. There was a miscommunication about. I want to see her." Something crossed his face. Not guilt. He wasn't built for guilt, but a kind of recalculation. He stepped back and let me in. Poppy's room was at the end of a hallway that used to be a guest room. The door had a latch on the outside. I stared at that latch for a second before I knocked softly and pushed the door open. She was awake. She was sitting up in the bed with her stuffed dog pressed against her chest, and when she saw me she didn't say anything, just held both arms out. I sat on the edge of the bed and she climbed into my lap the way she used to when she was 4, and she held on so tight my ribs hurt. "Are you okay?" I said into the top of her head. "I'm really hungry," she whispered. I went to the kitchen. It was after midnight. I opened the refrigerator and looked at it for a moment before I understood what I was seeing. There was food. There was plenty of food. Fresh vegetables, deli containers, a good bottle of wine open on the middle shelf. I stood there doing the math. There was food in this kitchen and my niece was telling me she was hungry. I made her a peanut butter sandwich and cut it in triangles the way her mother used to and brought it back to her room. She ate all of it before I'd even sat back down. "How long has this been happening?" I asked her. She thought about it with the seriousness of a child who has learned to be precise. "Since school started," she said. "That was September. It was January." I did not sleep that night. I sat in the hallway outside her room until I heard her breathing even out, and then I sat there another hour, and then I drove home at 4 a.m. and called my sister's old attorney from the road. His name was Mr. Petworth. He was semi-retired and answered the phone on the second ring in a voice that told me he was used to calls at irregular hours. And when I told him what I had found, he listened without interrupting. And then he said 3 things. "Document everything, do not confront your parents yet, and meet me in my office on Monday morning." I documented everything. I drove back to Denton on Saturday, and I took photographs of Poppy's room. The latch on the outside of the door, the thin blanket on her bed, the half-empty bottle of children's multivitamins that was 2 years out of date. I weighed her on my parents' bathroom scale when they were outside and wrote the number down. I asked her, carefully, what she ate in a normal day, and she thought about it and said usually a bowl of cereal in the morning and sometimes nothing until dinner, and dinner was whatever my parents were having, which sometimes she got a full plate of, and sometimes she got the leftovers. I asked her if she'd ever told them she was hungry. "Grandpa says I eat enough," she said. I asked her if she liked living there. She looked at me for a long time with those eyes that were so much her mother's I sometimes had to look away. "I want to go home," she said, "but our house is gone." Her mother's house had been sold through the funeral. The proceeds, I found this out from Mr. Petworth on Monday, had gone into an account managed by my parents as her legal guardians, pending my niece turning 18, a sum of approximately $190,000. What Mr. Petworth found over the next 6 weeks was methodical and, in its own way, stunning. My parents had reclassified guardianship expenses in a way that had allowed them to draw from Poppy's account for what they described as household costs: new patio furniture, a vacation to Hilton Head in October, restaurant receipts. These weren't huge sums individually. Together, over 19 months, they amounted to over $34,000. Meanwhile, Poppy had seen a pediatrician once since moving in, a cursory visit in September, at which my mother had spoken for her the entire time. She had received no grief counseling despite what my father told the school. Her clothing budget for the winter, according to the account records, was $40. Mr. Petworth filed an emergency motion to suspend my parents' guardianship. He filed it on a Thursday, and the emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. My father called me Sunday night. He sounded different than I'd ever heard him. Still controlled, but with something moving underneath it, the way a river sounds different when it's running over something that doesn't belong there. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he said. "I think you know," I said. "She is fine. She is fed and housed, and she had my number memorized because her mother made her learn it," I said. "Because her mother wanted her to have someone to call. You had 19 months to be that person for her and you chose not to be." He started to say something else and I hung up. The hearing was on a Tuesday in February. The courtroom was small and very cold and smelled like old carpet. Poppy wasn't there. She was at school with Aldridge, who had agreed to stay with her until I could get back. My parents' attorney was good. He had clearly done this before. He had a way of making financial irregularities sound like honest mistakes, of making my concerns sound like a grieving younger brother, projecting his grief onto a stable family situation. He used the phrase adjustment period 4 times. Mr. Petworth let him finish, and then he presented the bank records. He presented the pediatric assessment. A doctor we'd brought in independently had examined Poppy 2 weeks prior and found she was in the 8th percentile for weight for her age, down from the 41st percentile at her last recorded checkup before her mother got Sesmet. He presented Ms. Aldridge's written statement about finding Poppy alone in 11-degree weather. He presented photographs of the latch on the outside of her bedroom door. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and no apparent patience for theater, looked at the photographs for a long time. She suspended my parents' guardianship on the spot, pending full investigation. She appointed me temporary guardian. She then referred the financial findings to the county prosecutor's office. My father sat very still the entire time. My mother cried. I felt nothing I expected to feel. I thought I'd feel relief or victory or something clean like that. Instead, I just felt the weight of all the months I hadn't pushed harder, hadn't driven back, hadn't trusted what I'd seen in February when her wrist felt wrong in my hand. Poppy moved into my apartment that Thursday. I had exactly 1 bedroom, so I ordered a bed frame and a mattress that arrived the next morning and spent the evening assembling it, while she sat on the floor and handed me bolts and asked me how I knew which one went where. I told her honestly that I was mostly guessing. She found this very funny. I bought her a winter coat that Saturday, a real one, thick enough to actually keep her warm, in a color she picked herself, a specific shade of blue-green she described as the ocean on a clear day. We ate breakfast at a diner down the street and she ordered pancakes and ate all of them, and then looked at my plate and asked if she could have a piece of my toast, and I gave her the whole thing. She started seeing a therapist 2 weeks later, a pediatric grief specialist named Dr. Anand, who had a waiting room with a fish tank and Legos. The first session, Poppy came out holding a small clay bird she'd made and showed it to me with both hands, the way kids show you things they're proud of. "I made it for Mom," she said. "It's beautiful," I said. "She would have put it on the windowsill," she said. She was right. Her mother had kept everything. I thought about the car seat in my closet and decided I was going to move it somewhere else, somewhere I could see it. The criminal investigation took several months. My parents were ultimately charged with financial exploitation of a minor and child neglect. I won't pretend the process was fast or clean. It wasn't. There were delays and continuances, and a period of about 6 weeks when I wasn't sure what was going to happen. My father retained a criminal attorney. My mother wrote a letter to the court that their attorney tried to have entered as evidence and which the judge declined to consider. They each accepted a plea agreement. My father received 18 months, suspended to 6 with probation, plus full restitution of the $34,000 drawn from Poppy's account. My mother received 3 years of supervised probation. The terms also included a permanent prohibition from serving as guardian or financial custodian for any minor. I know what some people will say about that. I know it isn't what everyone wanted for them. There were days I wanted more myself, but I watched Poppy in those months as she slowly, steadily started to fill out again, cheeks rounding, the dark circles under her eyes fading, the weariness leaving her shoulders a degree at a time, and I understood that the most important thing had already happened. She was out of that house. The court made my guardianship permanent at a hearing in the spring. Poppy wore a yellow dress she'd picked out herself and drew a picture of the two of us in the waiting room. Stick figures, mine taller with spiky hair she insisted was accurate, hers with the stuffed one-eyed dog tucked under her arm. I keep it on my refrigerator, right next to the purple horse. She's 9 now. She still sleeps with the door open and the hallway light on, and some nights I wake up to find her standing at the edge of my bed, not saying anything, just checking. I always tell her I'm here. She nods and goes back to her room, and in the morning she doesn't mention it and neither do I. She asked me once, on a Sunday afternoon when we were making soup and she was in charge of the crackers, why her mom had made her learn my number. I thought about it for a second. Because she knew you might need someone, I said, and she wanted to make sure you had him. Poppy was quiet for a while, crushing crackers into the soup, which she prefers completely disintegrated. I'm glad she did, she said. I didn't trust my voice right then, so I just put my hand on her head the way her mother used to and stirred the pot.